Hello! Today we are going to talk about characterization. This is a mini lesson, and we are going to talk a little bit about what characterization is, and we are also going to introduce our next novel that we'll be reading, and talk about what your assignment will be as you read through that book. As you look at these pictures, automatically you probably know exactly who they are, probably even whether you've seen The Wizard of Oz or not. They're iconic characters, it's a classic show, it's a classic book, and it's something that you probably have seen quite a bit in your life. As you look at each of these characters, you can identify not only who they are, but some of their personality traits, some of the conflicts that they have through the story. There's a lot of things that you can tell just by looking at the picture of the character. Characters are obviously a very big part of literature. Basically, they are the story. That's what the story is about different characters and what they're going through. The definition of a character in literature is a person, animal, being, or thing in a work of literature. So it doesn't just have to be a person or an animal. It can also be a being, or it can be a thing. In the last example, in The Wizard of Oz, you could consider the ruby slippers a character. They obviously don't have any dialogue, but they can be considered a character. They most definitely contribute to the plot. Okay, so the first type of character is the protagonist. A protagonist is usually the main character. Sometimes they're called the hero. This character basically runs the whole show. Their actions or their lack of actions, the conflict that they deal with, basically creates the story and all of the dynamics within the story. The whole plot revolves completely around the protagonist. So you could say that the world really does revolve around the protagonist, at least in the novel. The antagonist is the character or the group of characters that causes conflict to the protagonist. So this is the Wicked Witch and her flying monkeys, and we know that she is the bad guy. The monkeys are the bad guy. They are causing problems. They are in direct conflict with the protagonist, and so that is also a really important part of a story. Now, an antagonist can also be the protagonist. It can be the same person. If you think about a movie or a story, the first one that comes to my mind is Cast Away with Tom Hanks, where he is on a desert island, a deserted island, excuse me, and the entire story is about how he deals with those issues that are in nature as he tries to survive. And so he's both the antagonist and he also is the protagonist in that story. So these characters are considered the minor characters, even though usually they have a fairly big role in the story. So the first type is a dynamic or a changing character. So whether they change for the better or they change for the worst, they do change throughout the story. So if you are going to look at The Wizard of Oz in the context of The Wizard of Oz, the Scarecrow is a good example. He starts out feeling like he doesn't have a brain and thinking that he's unintelligent because of that. And then by the end of the show, he has discovered that he does have intelligence and he's able to utilize that to help with the story. Same thing with the Cowardly Lion and the Tin Man. Both of them had personalities at the beginning and they develop over the course of the story. You could probably even say that about Oz. He starts out as a fearful, relatively bad guy, standing in the way of getting Dorothy home, but he changes his perspective a little bit and ends up helping her to get home. A static or a flat character would be a character that does not change. So Toto would be a good example. Toto is a character and is present and is part of the story, but obviously the dog doesn't learn and grow and change throughout the story. Probably the same for the Munchkins. You really just see them as they're, talking to Dorothy before she goes. And probably Glinda would be considered a flat character. Because really you only see that, well, you hear that little bit of her in the story. A round character is a well-developed character and usually is fairly complex. I would say that the Scarecrow is probably also a round character because he ends up becoming very attached to Dorothy and he helps to save her life and he becomes a hero by the end of the story. A stock character is sort of a character that appears in most stories. You have the jock, you have the brain, the sidekick, the crazy scientist, things like that appear in a lot of different stories, something that you'll see in a lot of different literature. Okay, characterization is the description and development of the characters throughout a work of literature. So there are two types of characterization. There's direct or explicit characterization. From here on out, I'm just going to call it direct. This is when the author uses the narrator, the protagonist, or another character to specifically cite personality traits or physical traits. An indirect or implicit characterization, I'm just going to call it indirect from here on out. This is when a character's personality traits or physical characteristics are presented more subtly. The reader has to make inferences based on the behavior of the character, the speech, the thought, how they interact with others, other things like that. So those are the different types of characterization. There's the more physical and the more direct, and then the more subtle inferred characterization. Okay, so here's an example of a direct example. This is from Harry Potter. Perhaps it had something to do with living in a dark cupboard, but Harry had always been small and skinny for his age. So this is very specific. It's saying specifically he's small and skinny. It also talks about his life. He's been living in a dark cupboard. It's really very specific. Okay. This is an example of an indirect or implicit example. This is also from Harry Potter. This is a conversation that Draco and Harry are having together. You'll soon find out some wizarding families are much better than others, Potter. You don't want to go making friends with the wrong sort. I can help you there. And then Draco Malfoy held out his hand to shake Harry's, but Harry didn't take it. I think I can tell who the wrong sort are for myself, thanks, he said coolly. So this is demonstrating sort of Harry's character, the type of person that he is. And there are a lot of different examples of that. There will be a lot more indirect than direct, usually. Okay, so how you analyze characters. So first of all, you want to decide what type of character is it. Is it the protagonist? Is it the antagonist? What is the conflict that this character is facing? And then you need to use the text as evidence to find indirect and direct descriptions. So what are the physical characteristics? What can you learn or what can you tell about the character's personality? What's the character's background? What kind of a family does this person live in? What sort of a background does he have? Is he popular, or he or she, I'm sorry. How does the character respond to different events or dialogue? And how does the character interact with those around him or her? Okay, so the next book they're going to be reading is called Wonder. And I'm not going to get too much into character because I want you to discover that for yourself. But we're going to be studying the characterization in this book. So your assignment is pretty simple. In your notebook, your composition notebook, you'll record indirect and direct characterization for at least 5 of the characters in the book. So you'll need to record the following. Number 1, the name of the character. Number 2, the type of character that they are. Number 3, is this quote that you're looking at, is it indirect or is it direct characterization? And then you need to write a summary of the characterization. Now you don't have to write the whole thing. You don't have to get really specific, but you do want to be able to come back to it so that you, if you decide to do a project that we're going to be doing later, you'll want to know what the quote says basically, and then the page that it was found, again, so that you can reference it later. This book is a really good book. I think you'll enjoy it, and we will talk some more about characterization when you have finished it. Okay, thank you.